Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to Healing the Spirit and welcome to this week's episode. So at the beginning of each week, I've been sharing what I'm calling my contemplations based on what I'm perceiving, based on the energy and the astrology of the week ahead. And as always, I am encouraging you to really tune into your own system, what is coming up for you somatically, emotionally, what is coming up for you intuitively, and to trust that that is probably the most important thing that you will get out of everything that I'm sharing. That my intention here is not to tell you how your week is going to be, but to inspire you, to facilitate a space, right? So that you can hear your own information and see what is resonating with you and what you feel like doing. And this is my contemplation for the week of February 20th, 2023. And if you happen to find this episode outside of that particular week, that maybe you found it way after, consider the possibility that some of the messages that I'm sharing here will be relevant for you even after the astrology has passed. All right, so let's get to it. I always begin with talking about the astrology of the week ahead. So here's a little bit of an overview. On Monday, February 20th, 2023, Venus will be entering Aries, right? Which is interesting because Venus is what we call in detriment in Aries, or, in the sign opposite its home sign, which is Libra, or one of its home signs. And then also very early in the morning, there is a new moon in Pisces. So I'm talking from the perspective of, I am in the eastern part of the so-called United States. I'm in Brooklyn. So for me, it happens at around 2 o'clock in the morning. And this new moon is interesting because it's unaspected by any of the other traditional planets. And Jupiter is currently in Aries, right? The traditional ruler of the new moon, both the moon and the sun, both being in Pisces, are in a sign that is averse, right, to Pisces, which is Aries. And then on Tuesday, February 21st, Mercury in Aquarius will be squaring Uranus in Taurus. On Wednesday, the 22nd, Mercury in Aquarius will be creating a trine with Mars in Gemini. And then on Friday, the 24th, the Sun in Pisces will be creating a sextile with the North Node. And then also creating a trine, right, with the South Node, which is currently in the Taurus and Scorpio axis. So when I felt into the energy of the coming week, what first came up for me was this energy that there's maybe a little bit of a prickliness to the coming week, right? It's kind of like when you're wearing a sweater that's like a little bit itchy, like not to the point where you have to necessarily maybe get change, because it was so painful, but just enough for you to notice it and to notice your skin against the sweater, right? Venus in Aries, Mercury squaring Uranus, to me really kind of feels a little, like there's a little bit of tension there. Mercury squaring Uranus specifically, I think will be interesting. There's a lot of opportunities there and probably also certain discomfort depending on how tightly you are holding on to your expectation about how things are going to go. So I'm going to talk about all of that in a little bit, but I want to start by centering us into something that I think is always operative, is always present in our reality, but this week specifically, there may be a heightened sense of it, right? So the reason why I'm saying this is because astrologically there is this pattern, right, of planets being in Pisces, Aquarius, and then also planets being in Gemini and Taurus. And so to me, Pisces, Aquarius are associated with the worlds of dreams, of cosmic awareness, of philosophical openings. And then these planets being in kind of an intense dance with the signs of Gemini and Taurus, right? Which are signs that are associated with procurement of immediate information and also physical body nourishment. I think there's just something so interesting, right, about this seeming paradox, this tension. There's something about the Aquarius Pisces orientation that to me feels ancient, right? That to me feels like maybe slightly elevated above, or, zoomed out from the perspective of the mundane. And to me, Pisces Aquarius realms are very connected to like this whale song part of us, right? Like the part of us that kind of wells or comes up from this deep well of knowing and being. Meanwhile, the intelligence of Taurus Gemini rests in the daily habits, right? The immediate form. I want to be very clear that I personally, in my cosmology, I don't hold a value judgment about ancient stuff being better than more immediate stuff. To me, that's kind of BS, right? This is subjective for everyone, of course, but to me, I don't really see that there is a moral judgment to like low or high vibrations, right? Or like deep things and shallow things, even though I do think that the phenomenon of high vibration is as real as like hearing that a singer is singing a high note, right? Like it's just, it is a natural part of occurrence, but I don't think that our overlay of moral judgment or moral framework is necessarily appropriate for the simplicity of the physical phenomenon. To me, spirituality resides in the mundane as much as it rests in the fantastical, in the far out visions, in the apparitions, in the cosmic, right? One of my favorite sayings from the Zen teachings are chop wood, carry water, right? As like the true path of enlightenment. So yeah, there's all of that. And also at the same time, I'm honoring that the multidimensionality of both may be really present for us under this particular astrological weather. And that multidimensionality or an awareness of that, multiple dimensions existing at the same time can lead to a sensation of conflict, right? Or can lead to a perception that there is tension. And so when I think about Mercury squaring Uranus and trining Mars specifically, I perceive an opportunity. Mercury in Aquarius squares Uranus and Taurus, right? Aquarius being a fixed air sign and Taurus being a fixed earth sign, feels to me like being in the middle of a deep philosophical conversation with a friend, and then being interrupted mid-sentence by a rumbling in your stomach telling you that you need to grab a bite, right? Or maybe needing to take a break in order to use the bathroom, right? Like there is something kind of comical about it. It is said in modern astrology that Uranus is actually the higher octave of Mercury, right? Which I am understanding it as that there are aspects of the Uranian that are actually perhaps more cosmic, more zoomed out perspective of what Mercury is already doing anyway, right? I think of Mercury as like the planet that is the messenger, but also is a trickster, right? Mercury works in unexpected ways. And so Taurus, or Uranus rather, is this kind of energy, but like even more zoomed out, right? Even more macro. And so translating this to our experiences, you may experience some kind of tension between the version of you that you see or that you experience in your vision and the version of you that is here right now, right? That has needs that need to be met on physical, immediate level, right? We can talk all day long about creating a magical life, but there are also some things that are just part of the consequence of being in a human body, living a human existence, right? Bills gotta be paid, right? We gotta have some food, So I think there is kind of an awareness and maybe a butting up of the two, based on a square. But I think what's interesting is that at the same time that Mercury is in the square with Uranus, it is also in a trine with Mars, right? And so Mercury in Aquarius, trine Mars in Gemini feels very interesting, very novel to me. Here's how it feels on a more basic, on a more energetic level. That randomness and detours are much more helpful to the cohesiveness of your visioning than you give it credit for. As someone who, if you've been listening to Healing the Spirit, you may know that I hold conversations, right? And then I share them in a medium like this podcast that is quite public. What I've experienced is that there are always moments where, despite my most meticulous preparation of questions or thoughts or, reading a bunch of stuff that this person, my guest, has written, right? Some of the most regenerative moments of conversations happen when I can sense my guest moving in a slightly different direction than one that I was hoping them to, that I didn't expect and I didn't even plan for. And then the moment that I give myself permission to really just be present with that flow, right? With that speed, with that energy, then something interesting happens, right? It takes the conversation and it takes both of us to a new direction that is alive, right? And that sometimes those detours, right, those moments where we deviate away from the plan is actually much closer to the vision that we are wanting to serve, to the direction that we want to be going into, rather than the things that I have planned, that I had time to sit with, right? And so bringing in also the layer of this new moon in Pisces, which is, again, as I've mentioned, is unaspected by any of the traditional planets. And also, I should also clarify that there are no traditional aspects or Ptolemaic aspects to any of the traditional planets, right? From the perspective of this new moon, which is in 1 degree Pisces. And also that it is in aversion to its ruler, which is Jupiter in Aries. I think it's interesting to think about how some things are better seeded or planted in the dark, right? If you live in the eastern part of the so-called United States, which I am living in, this new moon in Pisces is literally exact, right, at 2 a.m. in the morning, which I just love so much, right? Pisces is a mutable water sign, right? Water is like the slipperiest of the elements. It's kind of giving me this vibe of, seeds of dreams that are slightly incoherent, right? That are, beginning to start to take form while we are sleeping, right? This is not going to be the experience for everyone, by the way. I just think personally for me, it's so poetic to be thinking of it that way, that this new moon in Pisces is like very quiet, right? It's like happening when everybody else is sleeping. It's like creating new beginnings in our dreams, in our dream worlds, right? Starting with frequencies, vibrations that are so subtle, that you may miss, right? And your conscious mind may not have the appropriate net to catch this vision, but that it's happening anyway, right? So to me, all of this, Mercury in Aquarius, squaring Uranus in Taurus, Mercury in Aquarius, trining Mars in Gemini, new moon in Pisces, unexpected to other traditional planets, averse its rulers, happening literally, at least for some people, during a time when most of us are fast asleep, right? it's really an invitation to let surprises in, to make a little bit more space for the subconscious processes that are happening for us underneath the surface, right? This week to me doesn't feel like a week to be planning meticulously. Obviously, there may be exceptions, right? Use your judgment, as always. But generally, if you can help it, energetically, my sense is that you may be better off not over planning and just letting yourself go with the flow. Have you ever had an experience of giving yourself permission to completely not make any plans, maybe for the day, maybe for the week, and then maybe by the end of it, realizing, whoa, I actually ended up getting most of the things I wanted done anyway, right? Even without me completely planning it out. This week kind of has that vibe for me. So yeah, like letting things flow, allowing room for surprises, letting yourself chase random plots that are suddenly bursting forth, coming into the scene, right? Falling down a rabbit hole. All of this feels to me really so supported for this coming week, right? Chasing inspiration, chasing exciting conversations, letting yourself wander the place where you live, right? And being surprised. Okay, so what are some of the things to contemplate more actively this coming week, right? Here's the first question that came up for me. Where am I making my life more difficult by hardening my mind? Where am I forcing the puzzle pieces to fit when perhaps, in fact, there were no puzzles to solve in the first place? Okay, take a deep breath. If you are analytical like me, or if you like control like me, these questions may feel a bit tough to swallow, right? Like when I first sat down and kind of heard them, there's a little bit of shame that came up for me actually. It's almost like a gotcha moment, where it felt like to me like that very cool kid in high school or college that's like, why are you being so serious? Why are you taking your studies so seriously? Why are you taking your life so seriously? Like, I really didn't like that energy. If you are listening to this podcast, you probably know that I'm a huge nerd, right? You can probably sense it from millions of miles away. And yeah, it's, that's not, that's not me. I like to think about things, right? I like to get analytical. I like control. But I want to reframe this question a little bit, right? If you are not feeling that, great. Don't even listen to this part or listen to it anyway. But if you are feeling maybe a little bit of like an activation or a trigger, or maybe even a little bit of like teeny tiny shame coming up when you're hearing that question, I want you to completely clear that up, right? With your imagination. And now I want you to instead imagine it coming from the wisest, the most loving, sweetest elder that you know, right? Perhaps this is one of your grandparents, if you're lucky enough to have had that kind of relationship with a grandparent. Or maybe it's a mentor who's had way more experience and life under their belt so that you can't really confuse them for being a peer, right? Or maybe even like a public teacher whose voice or whose path or whose perspective you really respect, and that you find them, you find yourself wanting to kind of, or already having this kind of secure attachment with them, right? And then re-listen to this question. Where are you making your life more difficult by hardening your mind? Where are you forcing the puzzle pieces to fit when perhaps, in fact, there were no puzzles to solve in the first place? Notice what that brings up for you. For me, I'm feeling a sense of relief. I feel my shoulders dropping just a tiny bit, right? I feel my back kind of relaxing. And there's a sensation that's coming up for me, there's this awareness that maybe things don't have to be so hard, that maybe I don't have to solve everything, that maybe I don't even need to trust life, which can sometimes, that act of trusting can feel so hard, right? Maybe I can just say, yeah, not my fight, not today. And then eat ice cream or something, or like call a friend and laugh on the phone for an hour, right? My sense is that this question is particularly alive and pertinent for this coming week because many of us are moving through massive changes. We may not know it yet. We may not be able to fully conceptualize it yet. But I think these changes are happening underneath the surface, right? The hard questions, the hard answers that we've been solidifying over the past 6-7 years, but especially intensely brewing for the past 3 years, are really coming to a place of thawing away, right? Astrologically, I'm really thinking about how Saturn, within a month, is going to be getting out of Aquarius, and then how this is quite monumental, right? Because since 2017, Saturn has been in Capricorn and then Aquarius, right? Both signs ruled by Saturn herself. And even without the astrology, if you've been paying attention to collective energies as fractally reflected in your own life, you're probably aware that this is happening too, And for some of us, moving through these changes can feel quite scary because, the other day, I may have shared this actually with, I don't know, maybe I shared this on the podcast or maybe in one of my learning containers, but I was watching the show called The Expanse, and one of the characters said something along the lines of, the end of the world for the caterpillar is the beginning of the world for the butterfly, right? Which I think is a beautiful and kind of grief-stricken sentiment, right? Like this idea that as we allow ourselves to birth the new chapter in our lives, something else is also dying away, right? Something else is closing. I recently had this really interesting conversation with a dear friend who is really having a hard time with one of the paradoxes of life, right? Connected to their parent. And what I was offering up were a few different alternative perspectives, right? But they seem to have a hard time even listening to the alternatives, right? Let alone considering the possibilities that these alternatives can be true, right? At least on an analytical level. What I found interesting, though, being in conversation with this friend, was that through the interaction, I also sensed that their heart was beginning to open, right? Even as their minds are kind of still grasping, still clamping, their heart was doing something else entirely. It was almost as if, the mind were these thorns, right? And then the heart is where the rose started to bloom. And here's a little piece that I wrote afterwards that I wanted to share with all of you because this feels very relevant to this moment that we find ourselves in. I wrote, "The solid mind will always find it challenging to listen, to receive, and to integrate a paradox. But the heart is a true trickster. The heart always has a space because the heart always makes space. The heart always finds harmony because it knows no other nourishment but inherent harmony. The heart is always listening, and the heart is always transforming." Okay, so I also want to be sharing with you a couple cards that I pulled. And the first one is Invocation from the Begin Oracle by Stacey Jane, and also Illusion Dragonfly from Brynja Magnussen's Animal Totems and the I Ching deck. So the word invocation has been really alive for me because I've been deepening my Akashic practice on a personal level through a mentorship with Leah Garza. And Leah had shared an invocation to access our Akashic field. One of the ways that Leah talked about it that I found interesting was that an invocation, essentially the idea is that it brings near to us, it pulls towards us, it opens the curtains of our awareness to a field, to a dimension, to a resource that's always been available to us. That actually there is no separation between us and between this field of resource, of wisdom, right? But sometimes we need to be reminded of our connection. So it's interesting to me to think about this in relationship with the other card that I pulled, which was Illusion, represented by the dragonfly from Brynja's deck. It's kind of making me remember something I was telling some of the people I'm currently mentoring in Astrology as Praxis, which is the year-long astrology container that I'm tending with my mentor, Britton LaRue, which is that something I hear a lot when people are beginning either a devotional or a contemplative practice with the planets or with the tarot or with the Akashic field is, how do I know that the messages that I'm receiving, right, these images maybe that I'm seeing in my mind's eye are really coming from some other greater power and not me, right? And to that, here's my response. Who taught you that this greater power, the divine, the cosmos, whatever you want to call it, is not also within you, is not also speaking to you, through you, and maybe even in your own voice, right? And when I'm feeling extra spicy, I'll also add to my response, how do these people that taught you about that separation benefit, right? Benefit from teaching that you are separate from this element of the divine. And so something I'm encouraging you to be considering this coming week is, where are the unexpected turns, the accidental fall down the rabbit hole, the detours, the delays? Where are they actually part of some larger intelligence that wants to be a part of your conscious awareness? And can you give that random, perhaps chaotic energy a little bit of extra credit, right? Even if you are not totally sure, right, of what it is that you're bringing in or what it is that you are in communication with, can you trust that your heart has the capacity to hold and to alchemize whatever it is that you're moving through on a mental level, right? Something that the astrologer Caroline Casey has said that I still find super relevant, even though it's been years since I first heard her saying this, is believe nothing, entertain the possibility of something being true, right? And then play with that, right? What if you don't take belief as a necessary prerequisite? Like, to me, something that I have been thinking about, investigating as someone who experienced some degree of religious trauma, is that belief is kind of a little overrated, I think. That maybe it's not about having a belief, but maybe it is about giving yourself permission to act as if something were true and then just see what happens. You know, what if you allow certain connections, certain unexpected, seemingly random, seemingly chaotic thing that happens in your life? What if you don't have to believe that that's part of a greater plan? But instead, what if you give yourself permission to temporarily, right, act as if there is something to it and then explore it from that space, right? Of openness, of curiosity, of playfulness, of experimentation, you know? See what bubbles forth from that space of entertaining possibilities. All right, that is it for the contemplations. And as always, I would love to see some of you for readings. If you are feeling called, the next couple weeks are available. I'll be taking a break at the end of March, so my books will be closed then, but I would love to see some of you before then if you are interested in getting readings. I am offering both astrology and Akashic readings at this moment. You can find out through the links below. And also, I have a desire to request from you, if you feel called, if it feels resonant, if you have been enjoying the podcast, if you've been enjoying the contemplations, maybe some of the conversations that I'm sharing, I would love to receive a review from you or a rating in your podcast app. I have also been telling folks that all the reviews help, right? Even if they're only 2 sentences, 3 sentences, always welcoming more if you're feeling called, obviously. But even a short review really helps in getting this podcast out there, in getting people to be encouraged to listen to it and to find it somehow. I would really love to receive a review from you if you've been enjoying this podcast. All right, so I wish you all the best for the coming week. I hope you take good care of yourselves, and I am sending you so much love wherever you might find yourself in your process. Thank you so much for listening.